Hello everybody, it's been an exciting and disturbing week for me. People in the overseas development industry have spit their dummies, and the Democratic Party in the US has thrown its toys right out of the pram. I'm talking about the decimation, the evisceration of the United States Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. But notice, the word aid appears cleverly in the acronym, but the purpose of the agency is, sadly I should use the past tense, was international development. That might include humanitarian aid, but it's a far wider framework. After all, what is development? For USAID, it included economic growth, competitiveness, income generation, but also what's called governance, health, human rights. Pushing the envelope, the agency also thought that it meant influencing other governments towards the American version of democracy, and that included intervention in politics. USAID, in a true sense, was the operational arm of the State Department, Foreign Affairs Ministry in other places. However, the Agricultural Trade Development and Assistance Act of 1954, Food for Peace, led via executive order from JFK to the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 and a later Act of Congress, the Foreign Affairs Reform and Restructuring Act of 1998, establishing USAID as an independent agency. Just so we get this straight, these laws and the 2024 State and Foreign Operations Appropriation Act, sorry, I'm going to keep going on a little bit about these legal things, both of them explicitly require both congressional consultation and notification to Congress of any changes in the structure of the agency, any attempt to downsize it. So the recent measures taken by the Trump government are, strictly speaking, illegal, or at least need the sign-off from Congress. And none of that has stopped the indiscriminate slaughter of the agency. Until last week, USAID had a presence in 60 countries and operated in twice that number. It supported programs in 177 different countries through partnerships and non-governmental organisations, NGOs, or what we call civil society. And that effort has been funded to the tune of $40 billion in 2023. And that compares to $16 billion for the State Department and roughly the same amount for the CIA, the third arm of the American reach overseas, no longer. Even, and this really was a stretch, the USAID provided a vehicle for intervention in America's wars. I served as a contractor with the agency in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen. Which brings me to the question of why I, an Englishman, am talking about American government politics, American government agency. Despite its funding, the agency had about 10,000 staff globally, 2/3 working abroad in embassies. They had some technical expertise, but were mainly tasked to deal with the administration of the various programs. The broad sweep of the technical disciplines, from agriculture, business, construction, engineering, and so on, economics, governance, health, so on, was outsourced. 3,200 organisations were registered as USAID partners in 2022. Around 340 individual companies are known to be the main program implementers. Around 85% of these are American, with the British coming next with just 4%. Here's a list of the top USAID contractors, the leaders of the so-called Beltway bandits. Physically, their offices are located around the Washington, D.C. Capitol Ring Road, the Interstate 495. Metaphorically, the political and social world of government officials, lobbyists, and contractors. The total awards were $32.6 billion over 9 years, an average annual award of $2.1 billion. The top 5 enterprises received $18.5 billion from 2013 to 2022. And the so-called for-profit companies, commercial companies, took in just over $11 billion, or about 35%. Where do I fit in? Well, I subcontract to whoever needs my specialised professional expertise, my services in agribusiness and engineering. I went to Iraq in 2005 to assess the impact of reconstruction efforts. And since then, I've worked on USAID contracts in Pakistan, Somaliland, Afghanistan, Laos, Yemen, and lastly, until 2024, the Solomon Islands. So I've some claim to inside knowledge of the agency based on its wider field operations. Most of this work has been in the agricultural sector, but at least in 2 of the programs, in Afghanistan and Yemen, it involved what's called stabilization, effectively working with other unnamed agencies to influence matters in those particular countries. I wrote a book about some of this, Rivers of Aid, Stories from the Poor Countries. It's on Amazon, and there's an audio version on Audible. Check it out. But this isn't about me. Instead, I'd like to read a message that was posted today by an old friend and colleague from Iraq. I think it says most of what I'm feeling, paraphrasing a bit, and I hope Al will forgive me. Quote, I grew up on a cattle ranch. I managed corporate farms in California for 18 years before the opportunity to try working overseas. I liked it, and I spent the next 40 years doing international work. 14 years was spent working with USAID projects. I had over 4 years as an agribusiness advisor in the Caucasus region. The other 10 years was spent working on aid projects. I believe there's a need for a foreign aid program. I also believe there is waste and the opportunity for local corruption in many programs. In my view, Al's view, technical aid gives a faster positive effect and is easier than trying to foster social change in the culture of a country. Social changes will come one small step at a time and need to be done that way. I hope that a serious evaluation of aid programs takes place and that a leaner version of USAID takes shape to be an effective tool of the State Department at a reasonable cost. End quote. Spot on from a man senior to me, a fine agriculturalist motivated to produce food for hungry people in some of the most dangerous places on the planet. Most USAID contract staff are like my friend, not the caricatures portrayed by the media, who until last week had never heard of USAID. Another experienced colleague writes, quote, folks should be made aware that support to agri-food production and that sector involves long-term work, crop, livestock production, constructing processing facilities, enhancing competitiveness. It's much more than supplying stacks of food and medicines." End quote. Now here's the thing. Anyone who's worked for USAID knows it's dysfunctional. So-called contracts officers were the bane of our existence, usually overworked, often mediocre, occasionally incompetent, but all caught in a system that evolved to be top-heavy. Add in all the woke BS and projects that would have taken any commercial enterprise 6 months to complete could drag on for years. Ultimately, the slogan from the American people could have added the word eventually. Now, it's never. As my friend Al says, there needed to be a serious, professionally undertaken, independent evaluation of the agency, maintaining at least its humanitarian efforts, like the removal of explosives and mines in places like Laos and Cambodia. Weapons delivered by the American people. I want it reviewed, reformed, restructured, but that's never going to happen now. Those of us arguing for a sensible approach, keeping the baby, getting rid of the dirty water, are up against this kind of selective information. There's no coming back from that. So the multiplier will be huge. Not just 10,000 reduced to less than 300 people, but throughout the development industry. Tens of thousands of jobs lost worldwide, useful programs stopped. Indeed, another friend floats the idea that a, quote, foreign aid pandemic induced by the USAID virus, the image of weird programs like teaching pigeons to play ping pong, run by coteries of LGBTQ people from ethnic minorities, could induce a policy contagion that results in the systematic cutback, rollback of foreign aid. The worldwide development industry, big aid, it's what I talk about in my book, is probably on par with energy and telecoms, a trillion-dollar industry covering almost every aspect of life in much of the world. The abrupt contraction of official overseas development aid, an immediate drop of, say, 100 billion, 50% of the current amount from the wealthy countries, would mean vulnerable populations lose access to life-saving medical treatments, nutritional programs, and educational initiatives. A very poor country like Laos, where I'm just off to again next week, would struggle to fund its basic government services without foreign aid. Feedback from my network suggests the opposite of this scenario. There's more likely, people say to me, that there's going to be a feeding frenzy devouring the existing and planned USAID projects. China will lead, but other multilateral and bilateral agencies are scenting blood in the water. The outcome will be that for a new USAID, should it ever emerge from the legal chaos, might find it much more difficult to implement or influence foreign policy. It will be a long time before any beneficiary of the aid trusts the American people. The Beltway bandits might pivot to other clients to sell their services, and they might survive, although probably greatly reduced. The woke contractors and the NGOs, largely responsible for the images now defining the agency, will become, if they're lucky, baristas working in Starbucks. People like me at the professional end of the food chain will get snapped by the other opportunists or vanish into the sunset. To be honest, after this debacle, I might be reluctant to add any future US funded initiative to my work portfolio. On the other hand, those of us who do the serious work in the field, selling our know-how, a buck is a buck. Let's hope there's an outbreak of common sense and some restoration of services. Until then, this is all we get from USAID. Hi, if you're loving Quartermaine's episodes, please hit subscribe. I'll be absolutely thrilled. It'll really help us get views on YouTube. Thanks a lot.